This is TFYLP News Stand, a production of TFTalk.net. Join the cast as they discuss the world of Transformers comics and novels from both the past and present. Now, here are your hosts. I am Unicron and Insane Galvatron.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Stand. We're coming to you tonight to talk about comics. It's myself, Insane Galvatron, and with me is I am Unicron.
Hello, everyone.
And so yeah, well, the comics are the big thing right now. It's the one area that TFYLP hasn't really been covering much. We talk news and different toys and things. Something I thought about though as we were coming up with the name of this podcast and the newsstand was decided on. It made me think of TFYLP, we used to do the news every week, and then we started going to the format where it's more topical conversations every week. So people who want to hear news on a podcast don't hear it at TFYLP anymore. Well, you hear about this TFYLP newsstand, your first thought could be, oh, this is going to be the show they talk about the weekly news. Well, that's what you thought. You're going to be disappointed. It's more of a newsstand like buy print material, like newspapers, magazines, and comic books. So I'm Unicron. I guess we could start out just talking about ourselves a little, as far as our experience with the comics. We know comics go all the way back to the 80s. The G1 actually started as a comic before it was a cartoon. So what about you? Did you get a chance to read any comics as a kid, any of the Marvel stuff?
I never read it as a kid. I kind of got into the comics in my late teens and early 20s. I really didn't know that a comic was actually out there when I was a kid. So as an adult, when I got back into collecting, is when I learned about the comics. And they were pretty cool, so I started finding a lot of the older G1 issues, and that's when I really started reading them, late teens and really my early to mid-20s when I really started reading them.
What time frame would you say that was, as far as about what year was that?
Oh, man, this was probably, I'd say, like mid-90s, mid to late 90s when I got into it.
I did. You read them, actually, not long after they stopped.
Yeah, they were already out of print whenever I started reading them because there weren't any new ones out. I just started finding some of the older ones when I first started reading them. I don't think there was any new ones if I remember right. God, it's been a while.
Yeah, when I was a kid,
I think G2 was just out or something like that, or it just finished its run or something.
Okay, well, you were pretty close to it, relatively speaking. For me, I didn't really read any of the comics back during the heyday. I mean, it was the cartoon that got me into Transformers.
Mm-hmm.
When I remember, some kids at school occasionally would have a comic book, but I never really followed it. I knew they said it didn't really fit. The stories didn't really fit in with the cartoon, so it didn't really make me want to read it. I probably would have anyway if I could have found the things. The problem was I lived up in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and I never saw a Transformers comic, or I'm sure if I did, I would have been begging my mom or grandma or somebody, here, please buy this for me, but I never saw them. And up until, I think it was issue 72, I remember the cover was the one that had Scorponok fighting somebody. I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't think it was Optimus, but it might have been. I think it was. And that was the first one I ever saw at the grocery store over like at the magazine rack. For whatever reason, the first time ever, they had a Transformers comic there. And I talked my mother into buying it for me because it was less than $1. And that was my first ever comic, and as a kid. And I got like another couple of issues after that, the same grocery store. I know I got like 72 and 73, and I think maybe 74. And then I never saw them again. Like, and then went in that store, and I never saw them. And it wasn't until 6 months or so later, another friend of mine had gotten issue 80, and and told me it was the last issue. He let me see it. He held it up. Let me see the cover. He didn't let me read it. And I was like, oh, come on. Because I didn't know that much of the story anyway, except for what I'd read in those 3 issues that I had. I had to kind of pick it up. But and then I, got out of Transformers, yada, yada. People listen to TFYP for a long time. They've heard my story in the past. And it wasn't until as an adult, but this was in like the early 2000s, when the nostalgia bug hit and I started getting back to Transformers. First thing I did is I went online. There was a website called transfans.com, I think, they had comic scans up. And so that was my first time ever reading the full G1 run. But I didn't just read the US stuff. They had the UK scans too. So I got the full experience. I read, the UK version.
Cool. Yeah.
And incidentally, to this day, I have still not read the Marvel US G1 all the way through just by itself. So I have trouble. Funny story, when the new Marvel figure of the Death's Head was being released, and I was telling Ron that was something I was looking for. He had never read the UK stuff. He'd only read the US stuff. He's like, I don't know who that is. I'm like, oh, he was in the comic back in the day. Because in my mind, all I read was the UK first. It was all I didn't realize he was only in the UK exclusive stuff. So I'm going to have to reread the Marvel G1 stuff, just US only, just to see how different the story is from what I remember reading, 12 years ago.
Yeah, I know there are some differences. I haven't read all of them, either UK or G1. I'm probably less on UK than what I've read on G1.
Well, from my understanding, the way it went was there'd be like the UK issues were half the size of the US issue. So a US issue, they would put out issues weekly.
Mm-hmm.
So they would get the equivalent of 2 issues a month. And so what they would do is they would get the same issue we got for the first 2 weeks, but it would be divided in half as 2 issues. And then they would get 2 issues of their own stuff, and what would usually happen is it'd be a story. And this is where Simon Furman came in. Budiansky was writing the US stuff, and Simon Furman was writing the UK stuff. And Furman would take like where the issue left off from the Budiansky stuff, and he would kind of take some characters and kind of go off on their own little adventure over here to the side. And in those two issues, well, 2 half issues for us, he would wind it back around and put them right back where they started, so that when you've got the next US issue in, nothing would be out of place. And that carried on all the way through until the movie. Then all of a sudden, you had all these new characters like Ultra Magnus and Springer and all these guys that weren't really in the US comic. He used them on the UK so he could actually diverge the stories, didn't have to worry about looping back in anymore.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of Furman, there, he's actually I think he's the writer I like the best out of. Not to knock anyone, everyone does a great job. He's probably my favorite writer out of Transformers.
I have to admit, especially since we're talking about the Marvel G1 stuff, Budiansky stuff was kind of fun, but at the same time, it felt very, for lack of a better word, childish, in the sense of these are stories that were obviously written for children to read, like a lot of comics of the day. Whereas Furman stuff felt a little more mature, where the stories got a little deeper, a little more complex. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I think even it's the age-old thing where adults tend to underestimate children. I think, I'm granted I read it as an adult, but I could imagine even as a kid when I was reading the Furman stuff in those late 70s issues, I was impressed with the deep storytelling compared to what I'd been seeing in the cartoon, which at that point the cartoon's already off the air, but, kids can appreciate that. And I think even as an adult, looking back, I have to admit the Furman issues were a better read than Budiansky's. It's not a knock to Budiansky in case he ever comes on the show. It was good stuff. It was just a different style.
Yeah, and I think that may be also why I like Furman more, because I didn't read him until I was an adult, so his storylines were just a little bit more mature, especially in G2. I really enjoyed G2. And like I say, I think he's my favorite writer for the comics, for the Transformers comics. So, and I think he hit the nail right there, because he did write for a little bit more of a mature audience.
Yeah, and I think that's why the later issues of the US run, when he took over in '56, had a more mature tone to it. And it was really good. You mentioned G2. Furman wrote that too, obviously. I'm pretty sure he did.
Yeah.
What were your take? Because we know we didn't have this in the show notes, but we also had Regeneration 1, which picked up the Marvel story. Now, time jumped 21 years, so it's still in present time. Because the Marvel stuff was always in present time. It didn't jump forward like the cartoon did. So, what are your thoughts? Okay, because you have the G2 as one extension of like kind of way of continuing the Marvel run.
Yeah.
Furman came back and told a new story. But Regeneration 1 kind of takes the place of G2. Because they can't both coincide because they're too different.
Yeah, they're two different. It's almost, it would not really have to be an alternate universe or nothing that extreme, but You just have to take it. G2 is its own little series, and because the Regeneration 1 is better than G2, of course.
I was going to ask you your opinion on that, what you thought was better.
Yeah, I mean, I like G2, the comic, but Regeneration 1 is a lot better.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think it was better than G2, but it wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be. I guess, I mean, 20 years later, none of us are going to think the same way we thought 20 years ago because we change as we age. Furman's the same way. And I think a lot of people expect him to hop back in and write right where he left off. And you can see some influence from some of the newer stuff he's done, like Maximum Dinobots and Scorponok versus Grimlock. There's a couple things I felt like he were unnecessary to tell since he had a limit on how many issues he could do with only 20 issues. And I really felt that the ending, even though it was a supersized issue, it needed more than one issue. It was like, well, final issue, big plot twist, and there just wasn't enough time to flesh it out. The being behind everything the whole time. That needed to be the final story arc of the last 4 issues, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, it's fine. I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to remember back what you're talking about. I'm trying to remember the stories in my head. I gotta freshen up a little bit more in my older comics here.
Yeah, you had the story arcs. Well, Regeneration 1's what I was talking about now. Your different little story arcs you put in there, and then you got to the very end, and you had kind of alluded to the Dark Matrix monster earlier. Then it turns out that he was behind it all. All those other story arcs you saw, he'd set them in motion because he thrived on conflict. And it was just too much story to tell in one issue.
Yeah.
They needed to have that big reveal that the Dark Matrix monster was behind the whole thing for like the last 3 issues, at least.
Yeah, I think they might have knew too that I think maybe the story. I'd like to ask them a couple of things about that because I think maybe it was supposed to be longer, and then they said, well, they might have figured out it might have been getting canceled, or they might have been moving a different direction, so they kind of had to tie everything up real quick. I'm guessing. I don't know, but
my impression that when the plan from the beginning was to do only 20 issues. He was going to go to 100 and stop.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there shouldn't be any early cancellation unless at some point there was speculation they might extend it. And he started writing for the possible extension, and then they nixed that. I don't know.
Yeah. Or sitting there doing something. Have you ever gotten to the War Within series?
Well, we're going to hit that next because we're going to move on talk about the Dreamwave.
Yep, Dreamwave.
Dreamwave, yeah, because the point of tonight's episode is just to kind of let our listeners know our experiences with the comics, know where we're coming from as reviewers. Before we get into the Dreamwave stuff, I just want to point out that I listen to other podcasts where people review comics. A little something about me as far as the way I read them. A lot of people are I'm a very visual person, but at the same time, I'm not very artistic. So, like, I noticed, like, Dark Cybertron, people were complaining about how the jump in art style from one, because it had multiple artists, working on the same issue. So you'd have, like, from page to page, different artists, and people were complaining about how jarring it was because the art was so different. If people had not said that, I would have never noticed. It just because I don't notice the difference in art style. As long as the coloring and stuff is similar enough, I don't know. The only artists that really stand out to me, like, people will talk about, who was it wrote Last Stand of the Wreckers?
You're putting me on a spotlight.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't remember his name. But I know a lot of people were really praising. They loved his art, and then they liked the art, and the guy's doing more than meets the eye now. Or I don't remember his names because where the art doesn't stick with me, I don't remember the names. But there's only 2 that stand out to me. And it's only because their style is so distinct, it does jump out. And that's Livio Ramondelli, and Sarah Stone. Just because their style is so different, it does jump out at me. But everybody else's is close enough that I don't really notice a difference. So this isn't going to be the podcast where we'll be sitting here picking the artwork apart and critiquing how good it looks or how bad it looks. Part of the reason
I agree with you. Same way.
Yeah, because they can all draw better than me.
Exactly.
I've never started criticizing someone's art when even the worst art they do is better than what I could do. I don't feel like it's my place to be telling them that, you should have done better, because I can't do any better. So I just read it and enjoy it, and don't really pay that much attention to the art other than looking at the pictures to see what's happening for story purposes. But I'm not sitting there thinking, oh, wow, that's a really pretty image, or oh, that could have been better. So you're not going to hear that in this podcast. We're just going to focus on the story primarily. Okay, Dreamwave. When this stuff hit, this was in the peak of the nostalgia boom. 80s property, real big, early 2000s, because people our age that grew up in the 80s were now adults with disposable income, and this stuff was all flooding back to us how much we loved it. And one thing I did notice with Dreamwave back in the day, because this was the comics that I actually bought as they came out. I'd gotten back in the nostalgia train. We hadn't had any comics since the G1 stuff all those years ago, which I had finally read at that point. It's like, wow, new comics. I'm going to jump in on issue 1. And I actually own every single issue of the Dreamwave run.
Oh, nice, dude.
All the everything. I still have them.
Nice.
And, I'm not going to tread too much into the stories of Dreamwave because, they went under. They had started some storylines that didn't get finished. I liked some of the stuff they were doing. And, of course, the majority of it was written by Furman. So shouldn't really be too surprised. We like Furman, so we're going to like the stuff he writes.
Yep.
So, what were some of your... what about you? Were you buying the Dreamwave stuff as soon as it came out, or?
The main thing that I really kept up with was the first War Within series. Because, man, I don't know why, dude. I just loved that War Within Prime. I just thought that was awesome, dude. So I really liked the little mini-series, the 6-issue. And I still got them somewhere in the closet.
Yeah, well, they did two. There were 2 War Withins, and they started, the third one was like halfway through when they went under. So it didn't get finished.
Yep.
But I do
wish
remember,
that would have got finished.
I remember all the buzz about the War Within. Was because, like I said, before that we had the G1 cartoon and the G1 comic, and then it was just like whatever the new stuff was, like RID, Beast Wars, TV shows. But at that point, as far as G1 material goes, we hadn't been flooded with it like we have now. We're kind of spoiled now. Back then, the idea of getting to see their pre-Earth forms, that was like everybody was like losing their nuts over that. It's like, wow, we get to see what Prime looks like on Cybertron, because that's just something we never saw. Everybody was going nuts over these new designs for the characters, and I remember everybody was so excited about that. And and I really liked the thing they did with Sunstorm. He was a clone. It had looked like Shockwave clones of a bunch of other guys. They were going to be in the Diaclone colors. I liked that, and I would like to have seen that played out, but unfortunately it didn't get to. Which is what leads to my experience with the early IDW stuff. I was so ticked off that Dreamwave went under, and the comics ended. The storylines got abandoned. We didn't get to find out what was going to happen. That when IDW picked up a license, I said, why bother? I'm not going to sit here and read the comics for a couple of years and get really into it. Just have another company tank and go under, and it won't get to finish. For some reason, I was thinking that was going to be the trend. And so when IDW first started out, I didn't read it. I didn't read any more comics after that up until about a year ago.
I picked them up a little bit when IDW, when it first took over. I didn't know that they took over because I wasn't really following it as much as I was like when I was with Dreamwave, because I really like the War Within series. And even though the internet was around back then, it wasn't like now, dude. You can get info instantly. Back then you still kind of had to dig a little bit, and like, oh, what happened here, what happened there, and then everything wasn't as tied in together. So I didn't even know IDW started until they'd been out for maybe a year or so. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention to it. Then I started picking up a little bit here and there, and then at first it wasn't really like a series was out or anything. So I missed a bunch of the early IDW stuff when they first took over, and I really started getting back into them maybe a year and a half ago. I'm a little bit behind right now, but I've been getting a lot of the older the volumes that they sell, which are really nice. Which I don't know if you've ever picked one up or not.
No, I don't have the volumes yet. Like I was saying, most of mine are all digital right now, but I'm wanting to start getting the trades so I can have the whole series in paper form. But I wanted as nice, thick trades that I can stack together on a shelf, and line them all up. Before we get into the breakdown on the IDW stuff, I want to take a moment just to plug our sponsors. who unfortunately do not sell those trades, or I could pick them up really easily. But this podcast is brought to you by Captured Prey. Great toys, great prices, great service. CapturedPrey.com, and also Mega Toy Fan for all your vintage Transformer needs. Facebook.com/mega.toyfan. I've bought from both these guys. It's pretty much Captured Prey. If you want the newer stuff, newer release stuff, third party. Mega Toy Fan, or if you want older stuff that's harder to find, I don't know where he gets his stuff, but he has a ton of G1, G2, just about anything in between. So
Yes,
whether you're
yes,
looking
he
for new
does.
stuff, old stuff, two guys out, you're going to get good prices, good service.
Yeah,
All right.
I've dealt with a Mega Toy Fan, and I will say, great service and great stuff. You will not be disappointed.
Yeah,
If you're
look
looking
for them.
for
They
the
usually
older stuff. Yep.
I know they're usually at BotCon every year, and I'm pretty sure they're both going to be at TFCon Chicago. Go check out their Facebook pages and their websites for more information on that. If you're able to come out to TFCon, of course, I will be there, as well as some other people from TFYLP, so come on out and see us. It's in just 4 weeks, or just under a month. All right, so the IDW stuff. Because, Furman, we already said we both love Furman. And this is kind of what we're going to do with this show starting out. Because, again, there's all kinds of other podcasts out there that review comics. Plenty of them that are, reviewing the new stuff, like new issues as they come out. And we will eventually do that on this show, too.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have, there's other podcasts that are reviewing the old Marvel stuff. In fact, the guys over at the Moon Base, a couple of those had a little series going on for a while. They've kind of taken a break from it, where they were even doing reviews of the old Dreamwave stuff. And I'm like, there's one area I'm not seeing any other podcast doing reviews as far as comic goes. So that's what we're going to do here. And that's starting back with the old IDW stuff. We're going to start back at the beginning. Because like I said, I didn't read any of it because I was so ticked over the Dreamwave thing that I just didn't bother. And then after a few years, when they kind of did the reboot with the Shane McCarthy, not Shane McCarthy, it was Mike Costa, when they did the ongoing. I was going to start there because it was like a jumping on point. And then the comic book store I went to got issue 1 and 2 in, but then they didn't get issue 3. And then they put issue 4 in the box. I'm like, I'm not buying 4 unless you can get me 3. I'm not, I didn't want to have a hole in it. So that ruined that. He never got issue 3, so I stopped. So like I said, I was just out of the comics. I kept hearing everybody going on about Last Stand of the Wreckers and how great it was, compared to everything else on the same time. But I still never bothered reading it because I'm not reading the comics. Why bother? And raving about how great that comic was for 2 years. But finally, I was like, you know what? I need to go back and check it out. If this is as good as everybody says it is, I need to be reading it. Now, when I'm going to jump back and read Last Stand of the Wreckers first, because that was the first thing everybody was ranting and raving about, and then go into it. Well, I read Last Stand of the Wreckers, and I was hooked. And it was so good, I was like, you know what, but I don't want to start with the new stuff, because I want the full history. Because these soft reboots, these jumping on points, don't actually reboot anything. All the old IDW stuff was still in continuity. And so I wanted to read it all. So I binged. I essentially started with the early stuff all the way back to the Asian series, like with Furman, and that's all I did. One time I was like sick for like a week, stuck at the house with a box of Kleenex next to the chair, and my tablet in the other hand, just sitting there reading comics all day. And I think I spent about 2 or 3 months. Every day I would come home from work and read 4 or 5 issues, or 6, and I just reading, just burned through it all in just a few months and read through the entire thing. Now I know because I read so fast I missed some stuff, but I basically got caught up. And so that's what I want to do here is like you start at the beginning and review this stuff, because I know like with the Furman stuff, all the Asian series and the Spotlights all through Maximum Dinobots, a lot of people loved it at the time from what I recall reading, but nobody really seems to care about it now. And I think the biggest reason, when I don't know what happened internally in the company, why Furman's not writing anymore. I don't know if they got rid of him for new talent or if he quit. I don't know. Maybe if some of our fans know, they can let us know. But what happened was the new writer came in, which at the time was Shane McCarthy with All Hail Megatron, and he just kind of wanted to go in a different direction. And other than the whole Sunstreaker thing, he pretty much ignored most of what Furman had going on anyway. So it wasn't that the fans didn't like it, it's just it became irrelevant because the storylines, a lot of story threads were dropped. And it wasn't until Dark Cybertron that some of that stuff became relevant again. I really like what the guys are doing now with, primarily Roberts and Barber. They are going back and taking that old stuff that was, for the most part, irrelevant, and they're making it relevant again. They're picking up some of those loose threads and they're tying them up, and it's great. So I figure because of that, those comics deserve a fresh review. So anybody getting into the comics now or has been in since More Than Meets the Eye, maybe a lot of people use it as a jumping off point because they heard it was good. They read All Hell, or they read Last Night of the Wreckers, jumped into Death of Optimus Prime, and then the two ongoings, and they never read the old tournament stuff. Well, all of a sudden you've got Shockwave gathering these ores. It's like, what's that all about? Well, they couldn't just go find a podcast to listen to get caught up because there's nobody's covering that stuff. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to review the comics starting next week. We're going to start with Infiltration, which was the first trade from the first run. The wiki out there, I think, says you should probably start with Megatron Origins for whatever reason, because I guess they're trying to go with chronological. But there's so many flashbacks and stuff. I want to read them in the order they came out. Get the experience that people would have got reading them as they were coming out.
And that's one of the things too that I hope we can do too for people, because when you look back at like the way IDW puts out comics, as far as like the old Marvel, US, UK, G2, everything there kind of started off with issue 1 and just kept running all the way to 70, 80, whatever. The newer stuff is a lot of mini issues, except for, Regeneration 1 is probably the only thing that's actually run for a few years straight. And I know some of it can be really confusing if you're trying to go back and figure out what came first, what's this, what's that, and hopefully we can help people out with that.
But for somebody who doesn't want to go back and read, the entire run, because it did take 2 or 3 months reading. I mean, I was binge reading. Your average person probably won't have that much free time. I mean, I probably didn't have that much free time, but I made it. But I probably, it probably would have been an inconvenience toward my wife. So most people that are reading the newer stuff, and some of this other older stuff, some people say isn't as good. Like a lot of people don't like the ongoing, and they'll recommend don't waste your time. And there are some of the miniseries out there and all that really weren't that good, and they'll say don't waste your time or your money trying to acquire them to read them. So that's what our podcast is for. People who won't get caught up on the story, and they don't want to, bother wasting the time or the money to go back to reread it, but they want to know what's going on. That's what we're here for. And I will say this about the ongoing. I didn't think it was as bad as everybody else. Maybe it's because I was binge reading it kind of in between the other really good stuff. I don't know. But to me, it wasn't as bad as everybody made it out to be. And it may have been because I read the whole thing in like a week as opposed to, 2 or 3 years. Maybe if that's all I'd had to read for 3 years, I might have been hating it. But to go through it in a week, it wasn't bad. So,
to be honest with you, that's how I like to read too. I like reading it as it comes out, but then you just got to sit there and wait sometimes, and I tend to be impatient, so I like to go back and get miniseries where you can pick up like a little 6-issue or 12-issue, and you can buy them all at once and then just go through them and enjoy the whole story arc from start to finish. That is a plus to the smaller the runs, as far as putting them out and being able to read them. I think that makes it a little bit more enjoyable too, reading back issues or older issues.
Yeah. Now we may, like I said, some of the newer stuff as it happens. I mean, we don't want to we want these episodes to be relatively short. We're not going to do like another hour-and-a-half podcast every week. So like I said, there's a lot of podcasts out there that do cover the new issues, and we will eventually catch up. Because here's the thing: if we just do an issue a week on the old stuff, we'll never catch up. Because a lot of times you have multiple, like right now, with all the different Transformer series there are, we've got up to 4 different comics coming out a month. That's 1 a week. We would keep pace. We would never catch up. So we're going to do these by the trade. Like we're going to do Infiltration. We're going to be doing the free comic book day number 0 and 1 through 6 of Infiltration. So we'll be doing like 6 issues a week, maybe more depending on what we're reviewing. So we will eventually catch up to what's current. I mean, it may take us 6 months or a year. I mean, I haven't counted how many trades there are. I don't know exactly how long that'll take. Any major events that come up and the new stuff, we will mention it. They'll kind of let you know the news of what's going on. We won't really do in-depth reviews yet because then we want time. Because that's what we want to be. We want to be that source for the old news and the back issues. And then when we do get caught up, another reason I don't like doing that is I don't like doing the single issues when everything's written for a trade. I'm loving the new comics, but the story arc that just wrapped up and more than meets the eye, which I know you haven't read it yet. You're not caught up.
Yeah.
It's like it was excruciating going from month to month because the story's so good. I couldn't imagine trying to review that in pieces. I could go back now and review the whole arc as it'll be in a trade form. But I hear other guys do it and they speculate out the yin yang about what they think's happening, and then 98% of the time they're wrong. So I don't want to get caught up in that loop too much. But like I said, eventually we will catch up, and that's what we'll have to do. Also, besides the comics, we're going to review, possibly do reviews of other Transformers print material. But I haven't read the novels, but you have, Brandon?
Yeah, I've read the 3 novels that are out. And most of the novels, I like reading books a little bit more now than what I actually do comics. So I tend to read novels and stuff a lot more. I read most of the movie adaptations and those filler in between books, which we'll get into those later. I don't want to get into them now, but they're not bad.
I don't know. Like the movie comic stuff tries to make some continuity within the movies, but I'll be honest with you, I found those hard to follow. Like I tried to read some, like the movie 1 prequel stuff, and I found 2 or 3 different series that all seemed to contradict each other, but they all claimed to be movie prequel, and it's like none of them had the same stuff in them. I don't remember exactly what I was reading, but I'm like, no, wait a minute, which one is this supposed to be? Like, didn't I just read an issue that had Bumblebee doing something else? It's like I was confused.
That whole beginning of the movie stuff was kind of weird, dude, because the continuity wasn't established yet, really. They were so far. He came out, he just went like way somewhere else with the story, and so that's when they wanted to make the continuity follow the movie. So it changed the kind of everything that was going on at the time, which I wasn't a big fan of because I really liked the G1 continuity.
Yeah, well, unless our viewers really, really want to see us review it, because I haven't even read it, because like I said, I was having trouble figuring out which issues I was supposed to be reading and where, and which movies. It's a confusing mess. I figured if I sat down I could figure it out, but what little I read wasn't interesting enough to be worth the effort. I just wanted to read the ongoing, the G1 stuff. But I have something interesting. At some point, we'll take a break from the reviews. I actually have a couple of those Choose Your Own Adventure Transformer books.
Oh, nice.
So I think what would be fun would be, since I have the book in hand, I'll have to be the one reading it, but I will read the book. Of course, you only read a page or so, and then Brandon, I'll let you choose the adventure, and then I'll flip there and we'll read. So that'll be a fun episode where we read through the Choose Your Adventure. We may take a couple hits at it if you die too soon, because those were a lot of fun. I remember as a kid, if you'd made the wrong choice, and I always remember like it would say to do this, go to this page, and or to do this, go to some other page. And whenever I would make a choice, I always kept my finger there, so if I didn't like what I read and it was the wrong choice, I could go back.
Yep. I used to like those books. I used to like those old adventure books like that, man. They were fun.
Yeah, so I have a couple of those. I got to dig them out. I'm not sure exactly where they've disappeared to, but I know I bought them. I got them on eBay for like a couple of bucks. I mean, literally dirt cheap.
I need to, I've seen those. I haven't picked any of them up, but I really need to, because I think that would just be awesome to go through it and just read them, Because if you change everything, you can read the same book multiple times and get a similar story, but you can get a different ending, different results. So it's like reading different books at the same time. And I wish you could do a new version.
Reading the book, and you would have just the first few pages is the only thing that would repeat itself, because you'd get, say, the first thing you come to choose, you'd have 3 choices. Well, the first read through, you choose one of those, and you go off and do something. Well, the next read through, you do a second choice, and you get a completely different story. Because the book might be 200 pages, but to read a story, you may only read 40 of them, because you're just choosing certain sections as you go through. But so they're short reads, so it's not like it's going to be a super long podcast. They're going to read an entire book on air. Well, it's a short book. 40 pages seems like an exaggeration. I don't think it was that many. But that'll be something fun to do at some point. I got to find them before I can really commit to when we'll do that.
Well, man, that'd be awesome.
Well, Brandon,
Nah, I'm good, dude. I'm just thinking of I hope that we can help people out there with the comics because it's hard nowadays. Like for me, my local comic shop closed down about a
Hmm.
year and a half ago, so it's hard. I got to drive all. I live in Houston, dude, and Houston's freaking huge. For me to drive across town, people say, "Oh yeah, we got to drive across town." For me to drive across town takes about an hour and 15 minutes. If there's traffic,
Yeah.
it can take an hour and a half, 2 hours to go across town. So I
It's not like
don't,
the town I live
yeah,
in,
I
where
don't
across town
get to
20
go to the
minutes.
comic shop.
Well,
The
that's
other
one
one
other
was,
reason I did it too. They're easier to just get a hold of. I just get on. You get your Comixology where you can buy issues. They sometimes run special deals
mm,
where you can get it issues cheap. And I was telling you this one on the pre-show, um, but it's not too much of a spoiler now for people who are up to date on the comics, but it would be for you. But there's a character death that kind of gets undone, but an interesting twist in the most recent More Than Meets the Eye arc. And basically, there's a coffin, and when they open it, there's the reveal of who's inside. I don't want to spoil it for you, Brandon. That's why I'm not saying who.
okay, cool.
Um, they open the coffin, and because if you read More Than Meets the Eye, you saw the warning in the first episode when they launched. The warning that came through from the future said, "Don't open the coffin." Well, they opened,
Mm,
and the reveal of who's in the coffin is at the bottom of the page. And I remember because if your tablet, if you put it in, I don't know what you call it, where you're holding it upright, the whole page is a display. But I can put it in landscape mode, turn it, and then it'll fit the width of the screen and start at the top. And that's the way I read the comics. So I've got a nice large image, and the panel fits the screen, and I scroll down. Had I been reading that in the mode where the whole screen is on there, or if I'm reading paper, I would have been spoiled by what was in the coffin as soon as I turned the page. Even though I still needed to read the top of the page to get to that point in the story, because it was right there, it's like the bottom half of the page. But doing it in landscape mode on the tablet, when I turned to that page, I just saw the top. Read that panel, scroll down to the next panel, read it, and then scroll down. Holy crap! There's the big reveal. So I think personally, if you have a tablet or if you can get a cheap one, that's the best way to read the comics for reasons like that. Sometimes the panel layouts will spoil things for you before you should see them in the story. Um, so that's the reason why I'm a big fan of doing digital. I mean, I like to have paper copies too. You know, just like the tactile sensation of knowing I have it. Heaven forbid the zombie apocalypse happens, no electricity, I can still read my comics.
yeah,
Um, but I like digital as a better experience in my opinion.
yeah. And I'm a
So
little bit old fashioned. I like the paper comics in my hand. I've read
yeah,
digital. I enjoy it, but I just something about maybe the nostalgia of it. I don't know. I just like
mm-hmm.
actually having it in my hand and read it, flip through it, take in the eye candy for a little while, and then get to the story.
All right. So there you go, listeners. There's the lowdown on me and Brandon here. I'm Unicron and Insane Galvatron for how we see the comics. How we view them. Hopefully that was informative enough so you'll get an idea of where we're going to come from on these reviews. So if you haven't read the older stuff, tune in every week to get filled in on what happened. Because like I said, a lot of that stuff to me wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. The ongoing stuff, it wasn't as good as the current stuff. Whether or not you want to buy the old issues and read it, that's up to you. But hey, at least check out the show and listen to hear what was going on. Something I would like to do. I don't know if this could be arranged because he's in another country. But I would really like to get uh, Simon Furman on the show.
Yeah,
I'm going to play
same
that there
here.
now. That's a goal of mine is to try to get Simon Furman on the show because I want to ask him what they're doing now, where they're taking some of his old plot threads like the ores, with Shockwave, and the way they tied that stuff up. I want to see from Furman how that compares to what he was planning to do with those plot threads. Like, what did he have in mind for the ores that Shockwave planted? Just to see how the new guys how they varied, or maybe they talked to him and that was what he had planned all along. I don't know. I'd like to find out. So if any of our listeners actually know Simon Furman or how to get a hold of him, hey, just, have him contact us through the Facebook group uh, or through our website tftalk.net and get in touch with us. We'd love to have him on the show. We'll do a special Saturday show so that the time difference, morning for us is afternoon for him, whatever. I would like to get Furman on the show at some point down the road. So if anybody can help us out with that,
Yeah, that'd be
that'd be great.
awesome. because he's like my comic idol, my hero. So.
All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for this week then. Because we're not going to do actual reviews this week. We just wanted to let people get a little look at me and Brandon, see what we're going to be like. Hopefully, kind of had some technical glitches. We started later tonight than we usually want to. That's why I have no video, because I'm not on the computer that has a camera, because my wife's in bed because we're so late. So hopefully next week we'll try to start around 8 o'clock-ish. I worked late, didn't get home till a little after 8. Could have possibly still started by 8:30 if it hadn't been for the technical glitches. So next week we'll try to be on a little earlier, but listeners, come back if you want to hear our reviews. This is Insane Galvatron signing out.
See y'all later. Y'all have a good one, guys.
You have been listening to TFYLP News Stand, a production of TFTalk.net. We would like to thank you for listening, and be sure to rate and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast outlet. And most of all, share us with your friends. Please also check out our main show, Transformers for Your Listening Pleasure, on Friday nights on YouTube, as well as audio versions from iTunes and our website. This is Weird Wolf, host of TFYLP, and tune in next time for another episode of TFYLP News Stand.